Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Emily, and I'll be co-moderating this panel discussion today along with Giulia. And we have an awesome panel discussion on navigating LLMs in production. So I think there are a lot of questions, challenges that are going to be addressed. So let's get started. Let's do a quick round of introductions first, and then we'll get into it. Cooper, do you want to start?
Sure. Hello, world. I'm Cooper Johnson. I'm a voice user experience designer, which I always say is just a fancy term for conversation designer. I work with voice agents that operate exclusively over the phone, mostly in customer service and healthcare-based roles at a company called Gridspace. And I'm very, very lucky that I get to work with large language models that are developed in-house, entirely in-house, by people who sit just a few desks down from me.
Awesome. Natalie, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Natalie. I am a prompt engineer, which is also a fancy term for conversational designer. And I work at Quick, and we build large language models for a variety of clients across multiple industries. And it's some of the most satisfying, powerful work anyone can do. I'm very excited to be here.
Thanks for joining. Yam, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Yam. I'm the CEO of a new startup called MC. And what we're doing is we're trying to create an LLM-centric conversational design platform, which basically means getting LLMs to follow certain principles and alignments that humans define for them at scale.
Awesome. And then I see we also have Dor joining us today.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hi, thanks for joining. Do you want to give a quick introduction?
Yes, so I'm partnered with Yam. I just entered, so I have no idea what he just said. We're founding a new company, very interesting one. I'm coming from a tech background. What else you'd like to hear?
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Awesome. So I guess the first question I want to start with is, what are the biggest challenges that you've faced with LLMs in production? Do you want to start, Natalie?
Yeah, sure. So, specific to the work that I've encountered, sort of keeping the LLM's knowledge base current with, whoever our client is, they're kind of evolving information and maintaining a high level of accuracy as, this continually develops and evolves. I think that's a pretty significant challenge, especially when you have, a pretty widespread and diverse customer base. The knowledge base for any client is constantly changing, and you have to keep that into account when you're already live in production and put parameters in place to make sure that it performs consistently and accurately. That's one of them. Yeah.
Does anyone else?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think the biggest challenges here at Gridspace were kind of two things that are immediately adjacent to the LLMs, but are very, very important part of it. The one is having nice, clean, highly accurate data and a large volume of it. And we do have, we've had for years kind of a synthetic data generation platform we call Mixer. So we did have a head start, but it still takes a lot of work to make sure that you control data that is, very accurate and really on topic for the models. And then the second one was, and I'm sure I'll come back to this today, I'm sure we'll hear a lot about it, designing the dialogue system in such a way to kind of quell or crush hallucinations before they can start. We don't really believe in guardrails. It seems kind of like a crutch, especially because we build our own models. So just building an ecosystem, which is our dialogue system, around the LLMs such that the whole experience would stop hallucinations in their tracks and prevent them from ever being uttered by our virtual assistant. That's been the big challenge too.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'd love to dive more into that in a bit. Yeah. Or Jor, do you know?
Yeah, I'll go. Okay, so we are actually, we come from a very technological background. We were tech leaders and architects. And so, our perspective comes more from that end. What we think is very important is the ability so the thing about LLMs and AI in general is you never have 100% accuracy. Now, in a certain way, neither do humans. And the question is, with humans, we understand when something goes wrong, we understand what needs to be done. Let's say something needs to be explained to the person in charge. And the problem with most AIs is that there's no clear way of explaining what needs to be done and making sure that you haven't broken something else. And a similar challenge happens with LLMs. Let's say you have prompts and you change the prompt in one way. And first of all, it's hard to tell exactly what impact it's going to have. But another thing is that you're not exactly sure what it's going to break, especially if you're fine-tuning LLMs. So what we think is a big challenge is ensuring a sustainable way to work with these LLMs in production and responding to issues. So if something goes wrong, you can just step in and say, this needs to be done better or a different way, while being sure that you haven't broken a bunch of other things.
How do you combat that? Is that like testing or just like how do you find those problems that happen after?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways, different challenges in there. So challenge number one, let's say, is when people write prompts, a lot of times there are certain rules for writing instructions to computers that don't always apply in the case of humans when we talk to each other. So for example, if you're given a rule saying you need to behave like this, you have to have a clear criterion for when it's done when it's followed that rule or when it hasn't. And when we talk to each other, we don't always phrase ourselves in such a formal way. So you need some assistance to phrase rules that are, that it's clear when you follow them or not. That's number one. Second, once you've defined those rules, obviously you need to make sure that the AI follows those rules. And because it needs to happen automatically at scale, you can't be there and label everything. And there's so many different possibilities. But what you can do, for example, is set up what's called adversarial agents, right? So you can even think of it as like a committee of voices. These can be different LLMs or similar LLMs that are configured differently, that give their input automatically live on each of the outputs to ensure that the main driver of the conversation has followed all of the rules and score the level to which it has followed them. Another thing you can do is testing at scale. So you can create not only these supervisor agents that ensure that you follow the rules, but also create adversarial users to create user scenarios so that before you deploy to production, you have all these simulated users that maybe you know your users. Maybe you need to define what type of things they say. Maybe there's also like a baseline of jailbreak scenarios and stuff like that you can test for everyone. But you need to be able to define these adversarial users and run these tests automatically before you deploy. So those are a few things. Sorry, I could go on for like hours.
Oh, no, good. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Well, maybe this is a good place to discuss some of the, way we combat hallucinations, which I feel like is a really, that's something that we encounter pretty consistently. I mean, people are unpredictable, but LLMs shouldn't be. And, over at what we do, we implement really interesting hallucination detection and guardrails. And recently we've been exploring the use of NLI, so natural language inference. And for those of you that don't know in the audience, so that focuses on determining the relationship between pairs of texts, right? So you have the user input, which is the premise, and then you have the generated response by the LLM, which is the hypothesis. I kind of like, it's like a science experiment. It's really interesting. And so the core idea is to analyze whether the hypothesis or the LLM's answer is true, which would be an entailment, false, which would be a contradiction, or neutral, so undetermined. And what that would look like, so, you know, as the LLM goes through, as you were saying, all of its instructions and all of its rules, you know, right before it generates an answer, we started employing NLI. And before it finalizes the response, so you have the comparison. So each potential response that comes out, the hypothesis is compared against the user's question, so the premise, and the knowledge base that we have. And then we have the classification of that relationship. So we, you know, classify the relationship between the premise and the hypothesis either as entailment, so the response, you know, logically follows the input and the knowledge base, or contradiction, so it's wrong, or it's neutral, so it's neither a direct follow-up nor a contradiction. And so after these responses are classified or prioritized, those flagged as contradictions or those showing just enough of a high degree of neutrality are discarded. And that's been it's been really fascinating to watch, you know, the LLM, to instruct and watch as the LLM determines, based on just a premise and a hypothesis, what, you know, is correct and what isn't, and then how we assess that gray area of neutrality. So what is the highest degree of neutrality or irrelevance that you can hit before it becomes an actual hallucination, and where does that threshold exist? And I don't know, it's just fascinating. So we've been doing that, and we've been seeing a lot more accuracy in the LLM's responses based on implementing NLI. So.
And you're like involved with this whole process, and you can see, and are you able to, like, when the responses go out into production, like, are you able to then like review the conversations and make sure it's actually working?
Yeah, exactly. So we have, you know, in our panel that we work in, we have an event where we can see the LLM walk through every single prompt. And the NLI that we use, we call an NLI API, so an external system that we use. And we can see as the NLI, you know, will generate, so it generates a response, and then we see the sources that it cites, and then we see if the answer is attributable or not. And so we can actually determine, you know, alongside the NLI's determination if the response is appropriate or not. And watching that in real time is fascinating. I mean, working with these LLMs, I always say it's like, you know, teaching a baby how to be a person. You know, it's fascinating.
So, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just, oh.
Giulia, go ahead if you want to.
No, I was just gonna ask if Yam and Cooper and Dor also, if he's still here, if this is similar to the way you're thinking about hallucinations, or if you have other approaches.
So
Yeah, I think about it a lot as a conversation designer. From my perspective, I and other users of our software, I'm the beneficiary of a lot of great work my colleagues in engineering are doing, and kind of the conversations designer's summary of what's going on that I work with every day is effectively that our dialogue system is in charge, and that any prompt to generate an utterance from Grace, our virtual assistant, if it does not contain references to where it is pulling specific information, it'll be quashed by the dialogue system. And that's where if you're really testing Grace early on, testing a particular implementation, making sure she's ready to talk to real people who might be healthcare patients or just, you know, customers, you will often hear Grace say something akin to, I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of information about that, or I'm sorry, I haven't been provided with any information on that topic. And that, when you hear that, you know that the dialogue system has pumped the brakes on something that may not have a suitable attribution attached to it. And so the second part in that process is, if you're hearing that a lot in early testing or early fine tuning of a bot experience, well, that's probably something we should go add to the knowledge base. We're basically reverse engineering what real people out in the world are going to ask, what questions they're going to have of Grace, and anything we can do to shore up those answers. Let's just go put it in the knowledge base, so the next time we get asked, there is a reference, and the dialogue system will let it through. And that extends to providing facts in the knowledge base, or maybe just providing a stock response, a better response, like Grace could, we could put it into the knowledge base that Grace is not permitted to speak on a topic because, for example, she is not a doctor. That's something that comes up a lot. Or, drawing up, using the knowledge base to define certain boundaries of medical privacy, or, payment card information, security, that kind of thing. So people do ask, people from a range of technical backgrounds, from all sorts of prospective users of Grace. First thing they want to know these days is, if they don't use the word hallucination, they will say, how do I know the bot's not going to say something untrue that's going to cause problems for me or for my customers? So I think guarding against hallucinations is really in the zeitgeist these days. So it's really at the forefront of the job.
You mentioned testing. How much testing do you do before you release into production? So I know and how often do you do that?
Testing's on a massive spectrum. It starts, like unit tests that the engineers are doing in code, on up to testing that kind of blurs the line between testing, QA, and training. That's a product we have called coaching. But basically, like, there's some sort of testing happening at every stage of Grace development, from our ongoing development as a product up until kind of on the job training, you'd say. Like, you would ramp up a human agent to speak to people on the phone, giving them job specific information, and then maybe quizzing them on it. The same thing's applicable to our bots. So yeah, some form of testing's happening at virtually every stage of the bot development process.
Is that the same for both of you?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think testing starts at the start of building. And I think it extends, I think it's endless. We employ obviously internal testing, and we have UAT testing, but beyond that, in the actual testing, we find it very important to try to, we call it break the bot. Every single build that we do, every single LLM assistant that we make, we want to make it as difficult as possible for the bot to be broken in real life. So the testing process can actually be a lot of fun because, we want to try to get it to say something out of scope, or try to get it to, even say something that's a little problematic, just so we can go in and fix it, so we can make sure that in real life scenarios, if someone does that, again, like I said before, people are unpredictable, but LLMs shouldn't be. So when you get into that situation, you want to make sure that, you have those guardrails in place. And, I always say that I think the most important part of the build starts after you put the LLM assistant out into the wild and see real life interactions, because as much as we on the back end building these bots, and even the clients themselves, know about the product, the actual experts are the users, the customers. They're going to go in and they're going to ask the important questions, the ones that we built the LLM assistant for. And we want to make sure that the hallucination guardrails are in place, sensitivity guardrails we put in place, we put in tone guardrails, we put in scoping guardrails, and the entire testing process on our end is to not only make sure that, like Cooper said, adding to the knowledge base, making sure that it's as robust as possible, and that's a collaborative effort between us and between the client, but trying to break it, and it's a lot of fun.
So in terms of the guardrails, you said you have guardrails, like different types of guardrails in place. Do you also like try to make sure that data that's going in is also set up, and I guess the content that's being produced is optimized, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I believe testing is the most important part of the build, because in order to optimize the knowledge, you have to find places where there are gaps in the knowledge. And, I don't think we're ever going to see an LLM model that has a perfect knowledge base at the start, because I don't think that exists. A perfect knowledge base is built through finding gaps in the one that we're given as a template, if you will, and building it out consistently and endlessly. These things never end. I mean, we have projects that we start and that we have an end date to, but they're out in the wild, and they're, like I said before, they're like babies that we train. They're people, right? I mean, they shouldn't be people, obviously, but it feels like you're training, something alive. And when it's out into the wild, you have to make sure that it's, performing well. So yeah, the knowledge base, it's consistently and continuously built and optimized in testing. So you'll never get a perfect knowledge base at the start.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear if also Yam has any thoughts on the data curation part and what we're feeding.
So data curation, because I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of things that people brought up, but you want to ask specifically about something else? Data curation?
I mean, feel free to jump in on any of the pieces, but yeah, I'd be curious to hear also like the more technical perspective on what we feed into.
Yeah. So yeah, sure. So first of all, I think I on my part, part of what we're trying to do at MC is try to influence the market a little bit, the terminology, the approach towards these things. Because what happened was GPT-4 came out, in last March, and it was kind of like dazzling, right? And you saw a lot of people, a lot of companies trying to figure out how it works, what we can do with it, etc. And when it came out, there were a number of other LLMs that came out. GPT-4 was, when it really got into the public consciousness, let's say. But then those other LLMs, they, you ask them a question and they started veering off to like completely different realms. And so people call that hallucination. Now, I think these days, the term hallucination needs to be put aside a little bit, because I think what we're really talking about when we're talking about products, like product grade, production grade stuff, is not so much that, and also we're past that. Even when dealing with open source models such as Mistral, but what we are seeing is that hallucinations in reality are only part of a bigger set of issues, and we call that misalignment. So it's anything that the LLM outputs where the human looks at it, the human operator looks at it and goes, that's not what it should be doing. And Natalie raised the concept of checking for entailment, right? So that's a topic that's really close to my heart. This you do that with actually a different type of model called cross-encoder. But what it is, if I can go just a little bit more technical on it, because I think it's interesting, what entailment is. Entailment means that if X, therefore we can be absolutely certain that Y. I'll give you an example. So if I say, I like strawberry, and then the next thing I say is, I like banana. If I just said, I like bananas, does it entail that I like strawberry? No, right? Or it's debatable. However, if I say, I like tasty banana, right? Does it entail that I like banana? Or if I say I like bananas, does it entail that I like tasty bananas? Well, now it's not. I mean, even there, you can see some complications. Like if I say I like tasty bananas, and then I say I like bananas. But what do you mean when I say I like bananas? Do I like all kinds of bananas, non-tasty bananas, right? So the issue of entailment is very interesting, and it sounds theoretical, but when you actually see the LLM misbehaving, and you can see it, you don't need all these fancy terms, right? You can just see it. And then you want to do something about it, you need to be very precise. And one of the things that we believe is now that there are these generic models out there, the check for entailment, the check for semantic similarity, and all those things in what's called RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which is what all these question answering bots do. There's a lot of vague areas there. So people say, let's say a user comes in and asks this question, how do I know what documents to rely on when generating the answer? So what we do is we use these models that check for semantic similarity. But let me ask you, what is the definition of similar? I mean, all of us are similar, but also very different. It depends on what you're testing for, right? So if you know, I think I don't remember, but I think like the DNA similarity between me and a banana is what, like 97% or something like that. Doesn't mean that So it's a question of how we define similarity. And at this point in the market, all of these vendors, OpenAI, etc., what they're doing is they're trying to kind of hit a sweet spot of what similarity means. In practice, I mean, it all sounds very good. You can create great demos from it. But in practice, what you're going to see is a lot of surprises. What it's decided that it's more similar than another thing. So what we believe is that there should be a way for companies to define what is similar to them, what entailment is to them. Yeah, we really, I mean, as I said, we come from a technological background, so we're not everybody's cup of tea. But our belief, because of our personality, is that we like a lot of control and a lot of clarity. And we believe that ultimately the people who should be in charge of defining that clarity, it also comes back to like AI ethics and who's in charge of the AI. Do you kind of let it have a mind of its own, or do you define it? It should be the companies, the organizations themselves that get to define who they are, what's right or wrong in their use cases, and rather than relying on these super generic models. So we're all about how do we take these generic models and allow companies to customize them further. And that's what we're doing. I think that's what more people should be doing.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you found that people kind of engage with LLM responses more than traditional bots, or if you find that people are actually accomplishing their goals the same way, or if like conversations might go off on tangents, are they able to bring it back? Or yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're in touch with some incredible conversation designers. I don't know you guys, I'm sure, and you're quite experienced, and we've talked to a bunch of people from CDI services, and we've seen a truly wondrous amount of effort and expertise go into how to design these bots so that they feel perfectly natural. So I think the bar is already set pretty high. However, there are some things that almost like mathematically cannot be done with the quote unquote traditional model. So you mentioned context switching. There's also the issue of how well do you respond to multiple inquiries. So what happens? It's interesting to see, what happens, even just think about us as users. It's just to see that when we talk to each other, we don't go like, this is what I want now you give me a response, and now I will tell you what I want next, and then you give me. It doesn't work like that. LLMs naturally understand that because they're statistically trained on human conversation. Now what's interesting is when people talk to these traditional chatbots, at some point they will understand that they're talking to something mechanical. If they're getting what they want, which is what a well-designed chatbot should do, then it doesn't matter, it's fine. As soon as they're not quite getting what they want, now they're changing their mode of operation. Now they're a reverse engineer. Oh, this thing is stupid. I need to understand what the person who built it was thinking and how I can get it to do what I want. And that's a very bad experience. People usually stop at that point. And LLMs, what's interesting is, first of all, they fix it, but they make it very easy to fix. They don't require a lot of expertise to address those issues. You just need to give them principles and objectives rather than defining the entire tree of conversational branches.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think
Oh, good.
maybe also like to extend this question, as both Cooper and Natalie before were talking also about testing and like putting things out and seeing how people react, or like Cooper, you mentioned also if something is outside of the knowledge base, then it's going to give a very like sort of repair path conversation response. Do you have any fears with regards to that, of like having maybe these responses because you do want to test it in the wild and see for users, but in the meantime there might be some spots that are left unturned?
Well, that depends. Part of the design of any bot is, since our virtual agent Grace works over the phone, like kind of question one is there a human agent running backup for this? Is Grace working alongside human agents who can take the really difficult calls, or the people who simply do not want to talk to any sort of non-human entity? So knowing that, and knowing if Grace's polite refusal to answer things that are outside of the specified knowledge in the knowledge base is irritating or a problem to anyone, knowing whether we're going to be able to politely transfer the call to a human being is a huge part of it. And when that's not possible, designing, training, and testing around that contingency is part of the development process for the bot. And I will say that I think my main criterion for the successful LLM-powered bot call is repair or error recovery, like far ahead of retrieval augmented generation, whatever you want to call pulling from the knowledge base, because people may or may not want supplementary information or need supplementary information that the bot has to go retrieve. But being people is the consistent factor there, and there will be errors in the conversation, guaranteed, even if it's just someone clearing their throat and kind of confusing potentially the turn taking or something. Successful LLM-powered bot conversation will be able to get back on track, even if the problem in the conversation is a lack of available information or something that the bot's not authorized to speak on.
I'd love to know more about like success metrics and how you kind of define those and measure, I guess, with each conversation, because I would imagine it depends like on the use case. It depends on who's talking. Some people might only need one turn. Some people might need, I don't know, over 10 turns to finish, to get what they need.
Yeah,
so
I'm
curious.
I think you can't really overstate how much that depends on the use case. There are a lot of use cases out there, like doing simple outreach that a human being may not have been present or awake enough to do. So sometimes the bot is doing tasks that did not exist before, but really just require just kind of simple call and response, question and answer interactions between the bot and a human being. And it's very unlikely that any sort of knowledge-based retrieval would be necessary there. But then other bots it's assumed that they will have to answer a lot of questions, or they may be presenting something that is very sensitive, or is very is very conditional on the user's personal circumstances. So it's success ultimately, I think, is defined by the user who is deploying a bot to represent their organization or themselves, whatever it is. So without making the answer too slippery, it's just having the human touch of drilling down into the use case and determining what makes it great. What a perfect call or a perfect bundle of hundreds or thousands of calls would look like is really very contextual.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, it is incredibly contextual and case by case, and extremely subjective. And in terms of feedback, right? So I want to touch on, I forgot who mentioned this, but we touched a little bit on the importance of customizing the LLM build to every client as much as possible. And I think that plays into the feedback that we will receive, because you want to give the beauty of building the LLM from scratch for specific clients across various industries is, say you're building for, an airline company, right? What we've been doing and what I've seen in terms of feedback responses and actually getting the user to give literal feedback to us is when you give the bot some personality rather than just, having it stand as a source of customer service. Like, at the end of a conversation, was that helpful? Was that not helpful? Something we've been doing is tailoring it more to the client. Like, how was your flight? Was it smooth? Was it turbulent? And, we've done that with a couple of our clients. Like, for example, there's a client we have, and the bot is based on a dog, and the dog's name is Scout. And so at the end of the conversation, we say, what does Scout need? Does he need a treat? Does he need more training? And the amount of people that actually started giving feedback doubled. And so I guess at the end of the day, we have to see this as a collaborative experience. I always want to see this as a collaborative experience between what we build and the user. I mean, we can build what we think is the most perfect, untouchable LLM assistant, perfectly customized to the brand, but then the user can come in and try to break it. And that's why, in post-live iterations, that's where the real fun begins. That's where the real build starts. Everything else, I think, comes from, prediction and expertise, but that expertise is really employed at the end of the day, post-live, when people are giving that feedback and when we see that customization and, everything kind of put into the wild.
So you're able to work the feedback like into the conversation. So and then you're able to capture it and like store it for metrics and stuff. And
yeah, and it's really cool to see. And that's also, we have a really cool metric system in place over at Quick, where we can actually track the user behavior through the LLM, the journey. So we call them funnels and bot goals. And we can see, for example, how many times the user encounters an error and read every single conversation in which the error happens. If there's a certain topic that we want to track the consistency of, we can see how many times the user is talking about a very specific thing. If the client is product-based, we can see if there's a specific product that's mentioned that hits a certain place in the journey of the user conversation, how many people are reaching that product. And that informs the rest of our build, and we tweak accordingly. And it's a beautifully laid out system. And the feedback, the personalization of the feedback, I think, is such a key point here. So
yeah, absolutely. And when someone's having trouble, do you have a way to like ask for feedback when they're having trouble, or like how do you measure feedback when people are having issues, and are you able to capture any issues through the feedback?
Yeah. So, I mean, if someone says, so we have the, customized, was helpful and not helpful, like was the flight smooth or was the flight not smooth? But, it also depends on the kind of specific build that we're making for each specific client. So if someone's expressing frustration and wants to speak to an agent right away, for certain clients, they don't want to escalate to the agent right away, and we want to kind of keep it within the LLM because we want to really show the power of AI and how far it can take a conversation or any issue. So we just route them back sometimes to the LLM until they really want to speak to an agent. But yeah, we have ways of tracking, if the user is frustrated or if the user is incredibly, angry or dissatisfied, and, we can route the conversation accordingly. But, because this is all generative, you have to be, and we do have this in place, you have to be very careful with building any kind of static flows that recognize, words that are pointed, because someone could say something pointed within the context of an actually valid question that the LLM can answer. So that's where the interesting and kind of complicated and I think very entertaining work comes in. How are you going to classify when a conversation has that level of frustration or anger? Is
Right.
the LLM actually able to answer it, or is this just completely out of scope? And that's where the guardrails are, put in place.
Of course. Does anyone else have any other ways to capture feedback? Yeah, go ahead.
So first, I think just as a general comment, one of the things that excite me is that we're in the very beginning of this market where these bots can talk in a very nuanced way, complex way, and where these bots are deployed globally to like hundreds of millions of people. And what we're seeing is we haven't really yet started to really see at scale how we humans want to interact with LLMs. And I thought the dog example was very, very clever. I think this is something that's still shaping right now. And one of the things that happens when technology becomes scalable. So just to give an example, I don't know, like 200 years ago, don't take my word for it, but there was a way to do something called matrix multiplication. It's something in some type of algebra. Now, when computers came into the scene, you started needing to be able to do this thing called matrix multiplication, but in much, much faster ways, because it meant saving a lot of money. And then the industry created more clarity and more innovation to understand mathematically what it means, what matrix multiplication means, and how to make it even more efficient. Now, what I think is interesting here is we're taking human language and fluent human communication, and we're bringing it to scale. And it's not even a technological challenge. It's, you ask, like, how do you tell whether a person was happy or angry or whatever? But part of the problem is you get, sometimes you go into a meeting, right? And three people are, I don't know, let's say something close to home, pitching a startup idea. And then you leave the meeting and one person says, yeah, I thought he liked it. And the other person says, no, he didn't like it. So there are these, there's this complexity there. And I think what's interesting is people in this panel being pretty much pioneers in this emerging field is we get to be part of the formation of what it means to get clear communication criteria and understanding what it means to be efficient and maybe empathetic and engaging and approachable. Because at the end of the day, we want these bots to be engaged so that people actually use them. Yeah, sorry, maybe I went off on a tangent a little bit, but I thought it was interesting.
No, that's great. Giulia?
Yeah, no, I was going to say it felt really on point, actually. I think the topic of like deciding over what do we consider quality, what do we consider relevance, what do we consider the correct style, and measuring that, I think it's on top of mind for a lot of us.
Yeah, and Cooper, I was wondering if you have a way to measure, or I guess to measure the quality of the output, and the quality of the responses, and like making sure that people are getting what they need out of it.
We do actually, and like the way of measuring is just immediate kind of gut reaction. We do have an additional product called coaching, which is something we developed in-house, which is you can have conversations with the bot you've built and provide immediate feedback just by editing the transcript. We find that, like the barriers to fine-tuning a bot are so much lower if like no coding is necessary and no intermediary or middleman, so to speak, is necessary to relay feedback to us. Basically, any auto-generated dialogue or any link picking, which in classical terms is intent recognition in conversation design, can be just corrected by either overriding dialogue, just copy editing style, sorry, or just clicking a different box instead you misrecognized that intent. But what it comes down to is when a user of our software who is preparing to release a bot out into the world to speak to its customers, its patients, you can just hear and then immediately see the transcript and decide, is the quality of that response linguistically what I want? Is it in the voice that I want representing my company? Is the phrasing a little bit muddy, although factually the content is correct? Was there just a little bit too much improv on the bot's part, a little too much liberty taken on rephrasing information from the knowledge base? And all you have to do is just rewrite it how you wanted it. And you're making immediate but post facto changes that get studied and fine-tuned the LLM recently. So I think that's the most important one, because you can do it right away and just use intuition, and someone who's authorized to, someone who's permitting a bot to represent them or the organization in some capacity can just say, no, I know what's correct or what's best, and I'm just going to implement that change here.
So users can do that directly?
Yes.
Okay. And then we do have an audience question. Is that data annotation, the editing of the script? Or is that different?
I suspect probably on the back end it's very similar. It is even to me, who's internal to the company, it is just presented as something indistinguishable from magic. Like you're just correcting the record. It's supposed to be conversational, so you just write in conversational speech, no markup at all whatsoever needed by the user. Just literally change history, rewrite what you wish the bot would have said.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's our preferred method of feedback, because there's no obstacles to it and it's immediate. But of course, you can look at macro level trends across lots of conversations, because the transcript for every conversation the bot has will be stored on our analytics platform, and there are other routes to making changes if you see broad level trends that may not appear in a single conversation.
And how frequently do users actually do this rewrite of the conversation?
Pretty frequently pre-launch of a bot, because stress testing the bot for specific things, or the most important salient points, either about the use case or about the organization, it's just good. It's best practice. But then if the record shows that the bot did have some very unfortunate interaction, 1 out of 1,000 calls, this weird thing happens, you can recreate the conversation that didn't go optimally via a coaching session. Just role play and use the previous conversation as a script, and then at the point where things went wrong, coach the bot at that point.
So I want to make a little pivot, and I want to ask more about the technical side a little bit, and go into the API settings, and if you play around with those, and I guess, how you experiment with the settings, and how that works. And maybe Natalie, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I actually think that the current and potential relationship between using APIs and large language models, I think it's maybe the most exciting technical collaboration in the tech space for me. in my experience, since I, started working with LLMs and exploring LLMs, I've interacted with, for example, e-commerce APIs. You can compare pricing of products or tracking orders, or geolocation and mapping APIs, if you want to determine specific routes or directions. And I mean, beyond that, I think what you said earlier, it's sort of indistinguishable from magic. To me, it's, it's akin to magic. I mean, for example, weather APIs that create real-time weather forecasts, or, answer questions about current weather conditions. I mean, you have financial and market data APIs. And, in my own kind of exploration of this, I made it a little game for myself to think of, future APIs that I haven't seen in existence yet. Imagine if there was like a dream analysis API that you could call, so analyze users' descriptions of their dreams, or virtual interior designing API, or, an AI debate coach API, or emotional support companion API. I mean, the capabilities of these, I think, are limitless. And I think adding APIs to the build of any LLM is not only, magical, but I think it's crucial in maintaining the excellence of the performance of the LLM and the accuracy, and also just the encouraging the users to use it more. I mean, it really, it enhances it a millionfold, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Yeah, go for it.
So for starters, I want to say that there are two ways to interpret your question. One is what Natalie answered, which is basically the integration between LLMs and functionality that the organization can create, and through API calls, and the LLM can trigger these API calls. Another way to interpret the question, in my opinion, just as interesting, is so these LLM APIs themselves. So when you use the LLM, you use it via an API. And that API, you give it some text, you get some output, and then you maybe give it to the user, etc. But when you look at the options of that API, it gets very interesting. So actually, it's one of my favorite topics. I have like a, 70-page presentation that goes into the math behind all of this. Now, it sounds boring, but to me, it's fascinating to see how a change in some equation, if you understand what's going on behind it, ends up changing the behavior and almost like the personality of the thing in a somewhat predictable way. So one of the things that they have, for example, without going into the, I am really restraining myself from going into it. But one of the things is called temperature. Now, it's a weird term, but basically what it controls, and this is what you may call an emergent property, what it controls is, loosely speaking, is the level of creativity that the model responds with. So the lower the temperature, the model is more deterministic. And so it will, by deterministic, I mean that if you give it the same input twice, you will get the same output. But the other thing is that it's kind of like more tunnel vision, right? So if you increase the temperature, you get what seems to be more creativity. And how we can think about it, relate to it, is, let's say you've had a rough day, a stressful day, you're thinking about a problem for like 3 days, you can't figure it out, and you're tunnel vision. And that's what a low temperature use of the LLM is. You can, as I said, configure that through the API. But then let's say you go and you take a hot shower, and all of a sudden something releases a little bit and you can see something else. You take into consideration a detail that beforehand you were just like too tunnel vision to even be willing or able to look at. When you see that small detail, it drags you off to a slightly different space. And then you start getting innovation. It's a very good analogy for how the math works behind the scenes. So by playing with this temperature, you can control how creative it gets when the user comes. And maybe if the user is unhappy, let's say, you can you have some way to detect that the user is unhappy, you can increase the temperature a little bit and see what happens. So that's one thing. There's actually a number of other interesting use cases that do require a little bit more of a mathematical background and specific use cases. Somebody in the audience asked how to use LLMs for classification instead of cross-encoders, which is what Natalie discussed previously. And there's certain API configurations you can do to get the LLMs to be more deterministic and efficient at classifying information.
Interesting. Yeah, I have a ton of follow-up questions, but in the interest of time, I know we're almost at time. Cooper, do you have anything to add?
No, just say it is not relevant to me specifically.
Okay.
We're very proud of doing everything in-house. So for me, optimization comes from, the work my colleagues do on constantly evolving our models and optimizing.
Yeah. Awesome. So there's a lot more I would love to dive into, but in the interest of time, I think we'll just finish off with one more question. I think, what advice do you have for people looking to use LLMs in production, and what warnings or considerations or things to look out for would you suggest?
May I start?
Yeah, go for it.
There's one thing that I tell everybody. When GPT came out, then there was like an agent that does X, that does Y, the best way in the world. But at the end of the day, the thing about LLMs is, if we have an opinion about something, how to be a good customer service agent, let's say, it's our opinion. We can change it the next day, refine it. Our friend or our colleague may think differently. Now, what's important to understand is the LLM represents like a billion different opinions about everything. So how can you expect it to do what you want it to do when there are so many arguably valid opinions in different contexts? So what I personally want the market, but the direction I would like the market to go in, is lose the magic pill concept, that somebody comes in and aligns the AI for me exactly how I want it, when you have not explained it neither to them nor to the AI. Own your alignment. So take charge, take responsibility, and define what you want the thing to do. It's not a magic pill, but it's how good products are built. And there's no reason to expect that the same type of thing doesn't apply here.
That's great advice. Anyone else?
I'd say take every opportunity to avail yourself of either providing or implementing feedback and fine-tuning, which might be a fancy way of saying just I'm a strong advocate for getting human involvement early and often, as much as you can. LLMs are such a lifesaver compared to previous generations of conversation design techniques, mostly because they can get back on track and aren't derailed by very human quirks in conversation. But the power that LLM powered experiences have to help people and at scale is it's proportional to the amount of effort and care that human supervisors put in.
Yeah, I love that. I think humans really need to be very involved, especially with LLMs.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would just echo what everyone else says. I think it's a myth at this point that these models are running away from us. I think we always have our hands on them, and I believe that we should keep having our hands on them in every step of the process. And yes, be fascinated by them, be amazed by them, push them to their limits, but don't trust them too much. Always have your hands on every single part of the process so that, it doesn't run away from you and the myth doesn't, come true. And the last thing I'll add is don't think that the process ends when you're done building it and you put it out into the wild. For me, that's when the process begins. That's when the real testing starts. That's when the most honest build that that the LLM can go through, that's when that begins.
I completely agree.
Just one last point.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, a bunch of great advice. And it's important to remember that despite the fact that LLMs are no silver bullet, they're not going to do everything for you and figure out the answer to the universe and life and everything else for you. But it's important to remember, yes, it takes effort to bring them to production, but the rewards are huge. The potential is huge. It's something worth exploring.
Yeah, strategy is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Do not be deterred by the complexity required, because the return on investment is really, really huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll have to do a follow-up session of some sort for this, because I know there are a ton of questions I have that we didn't get to. But thank you all so much for being here. And yeah, we have another panel coming up next week, so stay tuned. We have a couple others coming up. So
Excited.
thank you again for tuning in. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.